Sometimes we must travel not to distant places, but wander through hidden lands within. In the tapestry of our memories, we find the artworks that made us who we are. Can we create a map of the beauty that awakens the soul to act? Hello and welcome to the Wanderings podcast. My name is Pedro Bonato and this episode is called The Artworks That Make Us. The idea for this episode came in these last few days that I'm staying here in Cairo at the end of my residency at the Yasmina's B&B here close to Giza. I thought about all the artworks that have inspired us through time, and I started thinking of them as I am a photographer, a musician, and a traveler. We sort of like collect the stories, collect these experiences, collect this like body of work that we create. But I also thought it was very cool to look back, and I did this little exercise and see which artworks come to mind, one in each category, that has influenced me deeply. I wrote it down, and then I thought, you know what, this would be very cool to share with the audience of the Wanderings podcast. I will start with the quote of the day, which is one of my favorite ever quotes from Dante Alighieri, that he says that beauty awakens the soul to act. And this quote is part of a larger part of the poem, but the way that it's usually interpreted is this idea that beauty seen with a capital B, meaning things that we consider like awe-inspiring, they inspire our soul to go and do things. And I think that's in the essence of art. And that actually got me to thinking about this idea of all the artworks all the way from almost the beginning that have inspired me. And this concept of beauty, when I didn't have a more sophisticated view of beauty, but it was that idea, you think cars are beautiful? You think soccer is beautiful? Just to give you a couple of examples of a Brazilian guy that actually doesn't really care much for those two particular activities. Nope, do not leave the channel. I am just joking. No, I'm not. But I was thinking of that. That was actually quite interesting, how things that would be absolutely uninteresting for me, or at least back then, people would use the word beauty related to that. And that's sort of like the first time that it broadens my horizon. I'm talking about being about 10 or 11. Now, a couple notes about the episodes as they are progressing, the solo episodes and then eventually the interviews and the co-hosted shows. There will always be a guide with links, with show notes, with the images that I'm talking about in the episode show notes. To make it easy for you to find, you can go to the podcast page, which is pedrobonato.com/podcast, and then you see a list of all the episodes. However, I thought it would be cool to actually do a number. So pedrobonato.com/25 will take you to today's links, recommendations, and thoughts. I think that would be a great way, especially for the people that are listening to the podcast and not watching, which is an option for you too. You can watch the episode at that link that I mentioned. But I wanted to first start with this one thing. I decided to add this idea of the Wanderings tool. And it's basically my recommendations of products, services, tools, like any kind of thing that I think is useful to help us either create a more quote-unquote creative life, or also to work on our productivity or different elements that are good to have this more creative lifestyle. And I want this eventually to be a sponsored segment, and because I'm going to be talking always, and that will be the case independently if it's a sponsored product or not, I will talk about the products that I personally use, and I will show you how I use it in the context of the episode that I'm talking about. And in this case, I want to mention one tool. As we're going to go navigating all this different kinds of from comic books to video games to sculptures to paintings to all the kinds of works of art like installation art. We're going to go through a lot of things. One of the ways that I capture my ideas is by journaling. And I've been doing this for all my life. Sometimes was in paper, sometimes was in a simple word processor, sometimes it was on Scrivener, which is the software that I actually currently use to create my, let's say, little notes for these episodes. But there is one tool that I've been using, I think, for like 8 years already, and I have about 5,000 entries on it. For a while, I did the stretch of 1,000 days of journaling, nonstop. Every single day I would do a journaling, and that tool is called Day One. This is an app for the Mac, for the iPhone, and for the iPad. I don't know if there is an equivalent in the Windows world or Linux world. I'm sure there is, but this one is amazing because it really integrates between all of them. I would love them to be a sponsor someday for the show because I have so many ideas of how I use it. But let me share it with you why I think this is cool and crucial. Sometimes we forget the things that inspired us. And when you have the habit of journaling, it's not necessarily even that you're going to come back to it. It's more that the process of carving memory somewhere really helps with our retention and also for us to pay attention what has our attention. And I think that is one of the most important and interesting things and interesting uses of a diary-like tool. And in the case of Day One, the cool thing is that it's on your pocket. You take a photo of, let's say, you're inspired by something. So then you take a photo of it, or I want to come back to that place. You take a photo and it will geotag your photos, it will geotag your posts. So even if you don't take a photo, you just want to write down, remember something. I have all kinds of lists on my Day One. It's like, I have my quotes, I have movies and TV shows that I watched, I have installation artworks, I have a list of artists, I have a list of questions, I have all sorts of things. Anyway, the other thing in the Wandering tool that I would love to share with you, because it's somewhat new, I am using basically every single day for all sorts of things, which is an AI tool called Perplexity. This, I think it's perplexity.ai, I don't know, like just Google it. It's the last time you're gonna Google, trust me. Like it's, you're gonna, and of course you can use ChatGPT and any other number of AI tools, but the way that I'm integrating this particular one is I write questions. And the cool thing that is different than ChatGPT is actually searches the web and gives you references. And that is very useful. So especially, for example, in this episode, I was thinking, oh, what was the name of that sculpture that I really like? I mean, I know the sculpture. I know even the history, but what's the name of the author? I don't remember. So I said, sculpture in Florence about this. And then it gave it to me. It saves so much time. It is like a personal assistant. It's great for, I call this productive creativity, which is when you're on a roll about an idea, but you want to reference something, but you don't want to stop your thinking to go research stuff because you're going to get into another mode. And the crucial part is you're not going to go check your email, check your Instagram and see if you can find it. You're done, right? So Perplexity is very cool. It's the only tool that I have available open when I am on a flow of writing or remembering. So here is my Wandering tool for this episode. The other cool thing that I think this whole process that I went through of going through all the artworks that have inspired me, that have been crucial, and I tried to see, okay, which was the comic book, which was the installation art that really spoke to me, that, as Dante Alighieri said, beauty that inspired me to act. And I think that's a very cool exercise I recommend if you want to tag along. And in that sense, I think this is would be my question to you of the day, as I'm going to spend the rest of the episodes, the episode talking about the artwork that inspired me. I'm going to, at the end, show you 2 pieces of artworks that were very important for me to make, that they were, let's say, in a way, I hope they're beautiful, but they're beauty that inspired me to act and continue my journey in the artistic world. So that is sort of like this callback to my inspiration and what I did about it. And this whole process is something that I think it was Jung that said that you sort of like have to make the unconscious conscious. And I think for art, and even for our artistic leanings, even if it is, let's say, even on a simpler note of like, I'm really not inspired, I don't know what to do, nothing really interests me, we go back to those things, and they will come in not linearly, like they'll come in a not linear way. In my case, I'm going to present to you those ideas sort of like in a more or less chronological order, because they sort of make sense, but they're not going to come, the strings where they sit are not like that. So with that, let's get started. First, let me start with something from childhood, which in my case, like pre-teens, which is comic books. And before you poo-poo the idea of comic books as art, I hope it's not the case. I hope you're curious and, let's say, sophisticated enough to know that there is art in everything. Let me remind you this quote from David Foster Wallace, that is, "The mundane is not a substitute for the sublime. it's a secret passageway to it. So with that in mind, the idea of comic books. So I got interested I learned how to read with comic books, with my mom reading comic books to me. And then I was like, well, trying to figure it out. This was like before school. So they have always been a part of my life. Since I became like, 20-something, I basically did not read comic books anymore, to be honest with you. I am inspired by them from an artistic point of view and mythological point of view. I understand their stories. But I sort of like haven't found anything that I would like to read again aside from the things that I actually read before. But aside from Spider-Man comic books, there was this one comic book that it was this little mini series back when it was difficult to buy comic books. You had to go to the actual newsstand, and then I would basically use all my allowance to buy comic books. And there was this story called Meltdown involving Wolverine and Havoc. I think the name of in English, the name of the comic book is Havoc and Wolverine, Meltdown. And what was really cool about this particular story, there were two artists that were doing the artwork for the comic books in watercolor. It was the first time, and to my knowledge, probably one of the few times where they actually did that. And the crazy interesting thing, which is sort of like, 10, 11, opened my mind to comic books as something more than just the stories of heroes with cool art, that this was an artistic expression of two different artists. They are John Moot and Kent Williams in watercolor, and each one was responsible for the art of each of the characters. One is like this Havoc, is like this character is sort of like more uptight and serious and sort of like mellow, and then you have Wolverine with this like this force of nature. Everybody knows about Wolverine. And they had different styles of drawing, and then you'd go from one panel to another, and they were different artworks to represent those two characters. And that opened my mind to this idea of there are different ways of seeing the same mythological creature or a different story. The other thing that was interesting, that is sort of like a callback to me, it was my first more like interest into the former Soviet Union, because the story starts with the meltdown of Chernobyl. And eventually I actually went to live in Kyiv, so I always had that on the back of my mind, that first contact with me with another culture, aside from like US and a couple more, let's say, quote unquote obvious one or dominant in the 20th and 21st century. It was really cool to have that reference always on my work. Then let me tell you about my favorite play. I don't think they ever translated to English, so I'm sorry about that, but I'll mention it. It's called As Primícias by Dias Gomes. He is a Brazilian playwright. In 1970, he wrote this play that, but you'll get the gist of it because it's like set in Brazilian sort of like medieval Enlightenment times. And he had this, it's basically a play with the idea of the right of first night, of like the owner of the lands, which is actually, I'll call it back to you later, that is a story that is so old that is in the oldest story of the world, which is Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh. It has references to this practice. It's that old. We've been doing this kind of like evil things. But what was cool is that it was the first play that I read, and eventually I actually played the lead character, which was like the hero of the story is trying to save his wife. And I was like 13 or 14, I believe. So it was my first time that play actually inspired me to write my own first play called Burden and Honor when I was about 14 on a typewriter for my dad. And so it was my first experience, I guess, of actually doing that work. I always, of course, I was reading comic books, so I always wanted to be like a comic book artist. My mother is a painter, my dad is a writer, but I never really got really into it. And we'll talk about this another time. And that brings me to, let's start to a little bit more of a let's say, quote unquote, deep works, which is, as I was going through this phase of getting into the theater world and hanging out with like older folks and that were like into the arts, I end up going to this bookstore that there was this postcard that was a painting from John William Waterhouse. Is this one? This is part of it. And it did not have any information about it. It was just a photo printed and like glued to a postcard. But this really inspired me. I thought it was really cool, very, very interesting. And it took me many years, many weeks of searching through artworks, art books. This is before Google. And then I discovered that this is a painting called Hylas and the Nymphs. And it has these themes of beauty and danger, of being seduced, thoughts about agency and desire. It also has ideas related to, let's say, gender roles, which was interesting to me to see at that early age what people were doing before, like a few centuries before, and what was appropriate or not appropriate, quote unquote appropriate. And that was also in the context of something that happened right back then. And the cool thing, I'm going to share it with you. It's very seldom that we have, especially in the 80s and 90s, capture the moment when you fall in love with something. In my case, it was photography. And it just happens that I was about 14. You'll see me with long hair and the Pink Floyd t-shirt. We all have our past, don't judge me. But it's very cool that my uncle had a camera. We were about to go, it was my first international trip going to Europe. And my uncle lent me his camera. And it was like a manual camera, so he was showing me the controls and what I was able to do. And that's literally the moment where I fell in love with photography, when I was 14. This is literally 30 years ago, which is bonkers. But that really is my choice of moment. What was the moment that inspired? That was the one. There is another one, which is the first time that I saw Shaker Akiki play the tabla, which is my instrument, that I said, you were going to teach me. And he says, yeah, sure. No. You're going to teach me. I'm going to figure this out. Still figuring it out. It now takes me to the idea of photography and travel. My first photography assignment was for me and my family to be the photographer of the family during our trip to Europe. And there is where a lot of artwork got revealed to me. And one of them was a sculpture. And this sculpture is by, I think his name is Gian Bologna, and it's called The Abduction of the Sabine Woman. It's in Florence, and what called my attention even were two elements. One is the first time that I saw that sculpture used as a 3D object. I was 14, this is as sophisticated I could be about that. And I looked and I thought, okay, cool, you have 3 characters and each one is in one side, so there's this spiraling going up. The other thing that was a contrast to me, that as I went to read about what the story was about, which is actually a tragedy in history, how they created this beautiful thing that is related to this horrible thing. And that collapse, that collision, that sometimes you need to create beautiful things in order to be able to withstand or to make sense of the horrible things in the world. That's what I learned from that. Not much after that, when I was in my first year of university studying advertising, there was the first book that changed my life, which was The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. And that was an eye-opener in terms of the importance of science, the poetics of science, the deep impact in our morality and our spirituality in a way. And it awoke in my interest for skepticism. I actually decided to go and study physics and trying to be an astronomer, but that didn't pan out. But I mentioned this book, and I'm going to mention this as also I'm going to mention 3 books. So the other one is called The Pale Blue Dot, also by Carl Sagan, where the Earth is seen from a distance by the Voyager spacecraft that turned the cameras around to point to the Earth. And then the Earth is seen like this little dot. And when Sagan suggested to do this, then he wrote this book, and it has one of the most beautiful passages ever written about our place in the cosmos, this little blue dot. And that actually inspired me to create my first band, which was the Blue Dot Ensemble in Canada. You can check that out on YouTube. And I also want to mention then, in terms of books, then one fiction book. So technically, I'm talking about 2 books, one fiction and non-fiction. It's a novel by Anne Rice called The Queen of the Damned. I'm mentioning this novel because it's one of the first books, I was about 14 when I read it, that I was awake at night and I kept imagining the scenes of the book and imagining alternative scenes for things that were happening in the book. And that basically awoken my photography thinking. The way that I create photos, I can trace back all the way to those nights reading Anne Rice and creating those characters and imagining them. And also that will take me to another recommendation, which is kind of vintage too, but it's kind of cool. That is We think that video games are a waste of time, and most of the time they probably are. But in my case, I was really inspired by this game called Zork Nemesis. It's a game in this called Zork series, and if you're not into video games, don't worry. This is not a channel for, this is not an episode talking about video games, but what I want to talk about this is that it has this one scene that is called the entrance to the palace, entrance to the temple. And you sort of walk around, and it has music themes, and it was the first time that I heard the Indian tabla. And it had this I actually had it as a recommendation of songs for a previous episode, so you can go to my playlist on Spotify with world music references. This will be the one that is sort of off, because it's like a video game song, but it's this very ambient song before it was a thing. And you walk around this environment searching for clues. And this is one of those things that to me is so fascinating that I can trace it back, my inspirations, my choice of sounds to like a video game. And the cool thing that I found out later is that the son of Carl Sagan, I think his name is Nick Sagan, he actually worked on this video game. And it actually gave me this idea of maybe there is a way in to get in contact with all these people that I am interested in. And this is also part of the podcast. I hope over time, as the channel grows, as the episodes grow, as people start sharing these episodes, I will be able to get a lot of this, let's say, heroes to talk about their process. And that would be another contribution that I'd like to give to you. Now, on the Carl Sagan vibe, I'm going to mention one movie that changed a lot in my life, which is Contact. Robert Zemeckis, I think is the name of the director, and with Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. This movie had so much impact on my life, not only because it's Carl Sagan's story, but also because it captured the beauty of science with beautiful visuals related to the art of cinema, which I was very interested in back then. It had this concept of having epic landscapes and having the characters sitting right in front, which was a deliberate choice. It had some interesting tricks in the service of the story, and that is absolutely magnificent. And the opening scene, where you start with the Earth with all the chatter that we have, and then even in the 90s, and it starts zooming out all the way through the cosmos, this cosmic perspective, which was so beautiful in Carl Sagan's cosmic calendar and in Cosmos. It really got to me. And now I want to mention also, like more in the photography part, this poster that I used to have in my room. That was the poster for the Tomb Raider movie, the first one with Angelina Jolie. And that is when I fell in love with studio photography. Because when I saw that, I was about 20-something. I had never been in a studio. I was a photographer for already 4 or 5 years, mainly photojournalistic stuff. But it was not really my thing. But when I saw that poster, I saw, oh, this guy was able to capture the video game character and the movie character and the actress portraying the movie character in that particular movie in one poster. The light, the design, also the design of the poster, especially the light that was this rimmed light and also like brought up the shadows on her face and her pose. And why is he doing it from the bottom up? It has this element of the accentuation of femininity, but at the same time, the warrior woman archetype. So to me, that called back all the way to this painting here, believe it or not, because it was another interpretation of the anima of the feminine. And I thought that was a very, very cool representation. It was, again, in the context of beauty that inspires you to act. I was like, I want to do that. I want to do a movie poster. Then I want to mention 2 TV series. One is a documentary series and the other is an actual series because they were very impactful to me as well, and I think they will be interesting for you. One is we're still in the geeky mode, but it's Battlestar Galactica, the reimagined series. And I mention the series for 2 reasons. First, if you're going to get into it, start with the mini-series. Do not start with episode 1 from season 1. That's a common mistake because you'll get the story already going and then you're not going to get into it. I fell into that mistake. A friend of mine recommended the series, said it was better than Star Trek. I was like, ah! And I was like, okay. I went to episode 1 And I could not understand what was going on. Why is this guy imagining this blonde lady? What is there those people all like sad? And why are all these robots attacking them every 33 minutes? You need to watch the miniseries before. Now, what awoken in me, it was literally when I went to Canada. Sorry, before I went to Canada, right before, when I was in the transition between being a government employee and saying, screw this, I'm going to go do a master's in Canada and pursue art and all that stuff. I watched Battlestar, and then it was one of my best friends, Fabio Marchioro and Nancy Marchioro, both of them. And Fabio was interviewed in the podcast before. I'll leave a link on the show notes about reinventing yourself. And they were the ones that said, Pedro, you have to watch this. And I did, and I was very glad I did, because this series has, first of all, the music is amazing. It combines elements of instruments from all over the world, and that is amazing. Not only the music is beautiful, but the acting is amazing. The storyline is this reimagining of the series of the 1970s, but it's really not about geeky sci-fi stuff. It's all about human stuff. And it really connects things in deep time. It imagines this idea of they're searching for Earth, there are these colonies. It has implications for even the world today, because it talks a lot about AI and the creation of us creating consciousness. And in the series is the Cylons, like this robot intelligence, like AI thing, that they get awakened and they're basically enslaved by humanity, and then they rebel, which is a very topical theme for today even. And what was cool about Ron Moore, one of the creators, and David Icke, I think is the name of the other creator, what Ron Moore did, he's a genius for TV shows, is that he created this Bible, this story of what the story would be about before he even wrote the actual episodes. And he was actually a writer for Star Trek, The Next Generation, and a few of the other ones. And everything that what he said in interviews is that everything that he couldn't do on Star Trek, because he had this very idealized version of the future, according to Gene Roddenberry's idea, he was able to do in this series. So the characters are very flawed. They are very, very interesting and well designed. As I mentioned, the music uses elements of world music. It has these ideas of mythology, these callbacks to elements of human history and human archetypes. I cannot recommend it enough. So let me know if you are a fan of Battlestar Galactica. I'd be curious to know if you are one of the good ones, one of the final five. So anyway, that I recommend that you take a look. And I mentioned the series because when I was in Canada, I was really into, they have a movie and TV production area. And that's what inspired me, like, I'm here, I might as well try and learn about this. I'll talk about that experience on another moment. But this idea of creating worlds stayed with me. And this idea of combining songs from different cultures really, really stayed with me. Of course, it did not start in Battlestar Galactica, but I saw on a commercial product something that used that for a goal. And that is what inspired me. And that's what Bear did, that I would love to talk to him one day, that he made the music for Battlestar Galactica and a bunch of other series and games and things. It's quite fascinating. The other series that I wanted to mention that is a documentary is Cosmos by Carl Sagan, the original one. And that is, I have to mention that because all my life was influenced by, as I said, I discovered Carl Sagan's book a few months after he died in 1996. And then I started devouring all his stuff. And it was not because I had to, it is because I could not hold myself. I had to go learn. And I watched so many times Cosmos, and as you will see over time in the series, this particular show, the Wanderings podcast, with me talking to you, is certainly my version of Cosmos. I hope I can do documentaries, I hope I can do more interesting things later, but this is something I'd love to be doing all my life. As I travel to different places, as I travel through different areas of expertise, even if it isn't the same place. That's what I got to say about Cosmos. It is a fantastic series. It holds up. It's amazing. There are a few dorky things from the 80s, but the concepts are beautiful, and there are some of the best quotes ever done by Carl Sagan. They're all in Cosmos. And the other thing that I should mention about Cosmos and Carl Sagan in general is that he actually worked with his wife, Andrian, in some of his best books. They're actually written together. And that's something that with my partnership with Jana, my wife, I try to bring lots of ideas for this show, the Artist Day show that we do, or all the work that we do together. It's very much inspired by that kind of relationship where both are creators in their own right, and they help each other to make something different and nice and interesting and beautiful. And I think Andrew and Carol Sagan were able to do this in a fantastic way. I am, in a very, very small way, trying to keep the torch going on that. That idea of sharing, it is one cosmos, this varieties of the artistic experience. It's a reference to one of Sagan's books that was published posthumously by Andrew. His book was Varieties of Scientific Experience. I intend to write one about varieties of the artistic experience, but that's just, if you've been listening to me so far, you'll be interested in knowing that. And Adrian, I'd love to interview you sometime. Another thing I wanted to mention, that I am on a fitness journey these days. And aren't we all, right? You have to drink this and take cold plunges while you go to the sauna and to take care of the kids. And you're like, yeah, I know. But I am in one. And I wanted to mention to you, as like a lot of artist types, they really don't find interest, like at least was the case for me when I used to be super shy, when I was like in high school or even before. I was not into sports at all. But then I started there are two things that got me into sports. Not for the sport itself, but for the physical activity and the mental and the emotional and let's say developmental, creative endeavor related to physical activity. And I want to mention fencing, which I did for a little while. But then it was still, let's say, boys club of who can buy this thing, like at least back in Brazil back then, like in a small town. It was like for the fancy people, and I was not one of them. And then another, let's say, that I thought was a fancy, pretentious sport, but I discovered it wasn't, was when I discovered tennis. And I mentioned tennis because even though I took photographs of tennis players, I have ideas for, let's say, more mythological things about tennis. Tennis is very mythological. It's called the martial art of the West. And it had two beautiful things that I really liked. It was 1-against-1, and you could be losing at 0-6, 0-6, and you're in the third set, almost losing. You can still turn around, just like in life. That was one thing that was amazing for me from an idea point of view, that got me into that idea of fitness, of tennis. And the other thing was that there can be no violence during the games. Meaning, if you try to hurt a player, you are out. They win. Which was, if you want to deal with your anger, if you want to deal with your creativity, with your limitations, with your aspirations, it has to be all through tennis. Of course, there are players that cheat, steal, and do all sorts of bad things, but the sport itself tries to transcend it, and that's what's beautiful. And you can have a team, but you're doing it alone on the court, and that's the beautiful thing. And I mention this because I was super depressed, working in my government job in Brazil, like feeling sorry for myself, playing video games, having beer and smoking shisha, all at the same time, killing zombies. And then one day I decided to, okay, let me go take a tennis class. I saw on a video game actually, that was like in tennis, like, okay, let's play around, let's see, oh, this game actually looks interesting, let me go do a class. And that's when I fell in love with it. And then I had a reason to go exercise. That was when I was the fittest in my life, when I was like about 27 to 29. And I really fell in love with tennis, with playing. I would wake up, it changed my mood, it gave me energy to go and literally go to do my master's in Canada. That decision I can associate directly from tennis. So sometimes there are these, that's why I call this wanderings. Like we wander through things to see what will bring us to, so to speak, the promised land. Just a couple more things. Another thing that I wanted to mention to you is like we talked about artworks as objects that we put on the wall or that we watch or that we appreciate from a distance. But I also wanted to mention, well, two things. One, my love for Turkish coffee. A ritual that I developed over time, the interest for coffee. Not for being a coffee snob, but I really like the taste of Turkish coffee. And it gives me this connection to history, it gives me a connection to the paths of this it's a story for another day, but as you know that here, a funny thing about Egypt, in Cairo where I am, they call here Brazilian coffee. In Brazil, we call Arabic coffee. So basically, whatever is considered exotic for you will be the thing that you call it, when basically it's all the same. It's very interesting. But anyway, I wanted to mention this one thing, like objects of art that we carry around with us. And to me, it is a bracelet. The first time I saw a bracelet, I was never really into fashion per se, ironically enough, being a fashion photographer. But for myself, I wanted to be invisible. I wanted to wear black and be done with it and not have to think about my clothes. Of course, I changed my mind about that. But the one item, it was one of my best friends, and unfortunately, he died in an accident when he was 24. But he was the first one that got a bracelet or a cuff. And he had a cuff very much like this. And I thought that was really cool. Like very sophisticated. He happened to be Egyptian. And that was my first contact with jewelry for me to wear. It was the first time that I thought that was interesting. And then I got one as a gift. There was a cuff like this. And then what I've been doing for the last, 10 years, certainly for the last 4, is that every place I go, I try to find one bracelet or a cuff that I'll wear for the next country. So in this case, this cuff was bought in Thailand by this old man, and it was exactly the kind of cuff that I really like. I think there is something that is this treasures we carry with us that I think is very important. I think this is one of those things that art sometimes is wearable. And the advantage of having this is those reminders of what you're longing for, what is really important for you. Those moments and times, or those times that have not yet come, they can be represented in these kinds of things. Later I'll talk to you about this other project related to jewelry that I'm working on. I just wanted to give you a hint. It's taking a little while to come out, but I can trace it directly back to my interest in objects like this. And I think that this hunt for personal treasure is what this life is sort of all about. I have just a couple more suggestions for you. I hope you're finding this interesting. And on that note, I would love to invite you to share this episode, this project with a friend of yours. If there are any of these artworks or any of these ideas that I'm presenting that you found interesting, I would ask you to share with someone. We are at the beginning of this new project that I hope to be doing forever. That is this podcast that I share my inspiration and my perplexity with you. So if you're listening, you can also leave a review on iTunes. If you're watching, you can leave a like, as they call it today. You can subscribe to the channel. You can check out everything at pedrobonato.com/podcast. You can take a look at my artwork there. If you're interested in my photography, you can take a look at it there, my music. But let's keep going. I want to mention to you one of the songs that I think is the most influential to me. I will do a whole episode about my path through world music, but this one really caught me. It's called Lama Bada Yatatana, that if you translate it to be When She Begins to Sway. And the idea is, this is a song from the Andalus period. It was this is basically Spain and the Moorish Spain, that between the 7th century and the 14th century, I believe, that the Moors were there. And a lot of beautiful art and music and paintings and everything was created in that place. I really hope to visit there. I haven't been there yet. But this song was created either 11th, 14th century or 18th, we don't know. But there was this tradition called mushahat, that is this tapestry, this mixture of things, that the melody of the song Lama Bada Yatatana, according to Dr. George Sawa, that also was interviewed for one of the first interviews, actually I think the first interview of this podcast many years ago. He is Arabic music scholar and qanun player, and he talked a lot about Lama Bada Yatatana, that he does a lot of research. And the idea is that the melody is probably very ancient, very old, about at least 1,000 years. And the lyrics may be modern. But they also, and if you see the themes throughout these examples that I gave, how much it has to do even with this idea of beauty and beauty that makes you act. And the interesting thing for me is that since I do not speak Arabic, I mean, now I know the lyrics for this particular song and a few others, but I did not know. But that's exactly what it got to me. And the interesting thing is that when I started playing the Arabic drums, the tabla, the Arabic tabla, I know it confuses with the Indian one, but I was really into the drumming itself. The dance, like belly dance and other kinds of folkloric dances from the Middle East, really didn't impact me in the beginning. They really did, so that's why I'm combining actually a song and a dance. It was a dancer in Brazil called Dalila, Delilah, you guys in English, that Delilah Lopez, that I actually photographed for my Orientalist series. She was the first dancer that I actually paid attention to because she captivated the audience, and I think she was dancing this song. She became a friend. I had the classes of drumming with the drummer that worked with her back in Brazil, the first Egyptian drummer to go to work in Brazil. And this song has this strange beat that is a 10/8. It's called a samai. So it's not like in the Western world that you have like everything in 2s, 3s, or 4s. It has this 10 count beat, which was already strange. But the interesting thing is that because you change your tempo, you change your pace, not your tempo. Because you change your pace, other melody options appear. This took me on a journey in music because it started with this one that was so beautiful. And one little, let's say, not pet peeve, but a caveat, like a little thing that I have with the world music community is that sometimes there are these songs that they become like, they're not famous at any stretch of the imagination for the general public, but they are very known in the world of world music. And people usually say, okay, Lama Bada again. It's sort of like, okay, you have to play Let It Be again, but I don't think so. There is a reason why they became, let's say, the hits of the world music scene. It's a beautiful song. And it will take you to other places, other samais, other kinds of high art in the Arabic world. But this is the portal in. We'll come back to this in other episodes. The portal in. It doesn't matter how you get into beauty as long as you get somehow in the garden. That's how I think about it. Now let me tell you about the things a bit more modern, and then we're going to finish. When I went to Canada, I went to see, let me tell you the story appropriately. I went to the AGO, the Art Gallery of Ontario, that has usually contemporary art. I am, to be honest, not much of a fan of most contemporary art. You probably too, unless you're pretending. But I wanted to see, and then I was looking at the website, and there was this, there is an excavation on the house where the AGO is located. And I was like, but Canada is a very young country. Why do they have an excavation? It's kind of funny. But it's like, okay, and then you can go and see. They made it into sort of like a open idea that you could like open to the public to go see the work that they were doing. And then you go there, and then the volunteers on the place are talking about the work of the archaeologists and anthropologists that are working on the place. And then they discovered, so this house, the house is the AGO, is the Art Gallery of Ontario. It used to be the mayor's house. It used to be some rich person's house. And then they discovered this waxed artworks. So these artworks, they were hidden around the house. And then that's sort of like what the findings were suggesting. So it's not that old history, it's like 100 years ago or something. But they're like, okay, and then it's kind of cute, right? That artworks were found in an art gallery. And then the story was about this lady that came from Ireland. I will not remember all the details, but because it's 2009, but that I saw this. But she came from Ireland, and then she was working, I guess, on the kitchen or cleaning or something on the house. And then she started trying to do this artwork. So she started putting this wax on different kinds of objects. First, it was like her hair or little objects, and she would hide around the house. And at some point, they thought, who's putting this stuff? When someone found one of those things, right? So they found it's like they were kind of suspicious, but she had this compulsion that she had to keep hiding this artwork somewhere. And she decided to do ever more elaborate and bigger things. There was even her diary that she put all in wax so that people could not read it. And they found this diary, and then the archaeologists, they even have like on this table, they're showing that they're actually using this very expensive microscope to scan and try to see the layers of the pages through the wax. It was like this crazy idea, very interesting. And then you could see that she even put, like, at some point at the end, they found behind one of the, you know, like when you have old houses that they have plastered the wall so you don't know that there is like a hidden room behind. They found where she used to live, to sleep. And then she even put her face on the wax, which is probably very hurtful. And they still have those things. And then it's like, oh, okay, cool, that's kind of interesting. And then they had this little paper that you could get that it would give you, like, oh, if you'd like to know more about the archaeology, like what's going on, you can check out this paper. It has some more information about what's being published. That was really cool, but then, and I'm a sucker for anything archaeological. Then on the subway, I went to see, of course, the AGO's regular exhibit. There were a couple of things that were interesting. And then when I was on the subway, I'm like, oh, okay, let me read what they actually publishing. Like, well, how does this work? Like, for, let's say, not so old history, or these people were doing excavations for. I started reading and it says, oh, this is the work of this particular archaeologist, and then they're trying to do this publication. And by the way, this is an artwork by Iris Howler. Wait, what? So in the middle of this paper has the artist signature. Iris Howler. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. I hope she goes to the podcast at some point because she's amazing. The whole thing was not a real excavation. The whole thing was an art installation by Iris Howler. And they do not tell you. It's this brilliant idea for an art installation. That's what opened my mind. I took a little while to tell you the story to hopefully convey how amazed I was that she plays with the idea of art and science. She plays with the expectations of the public of what if they're seeing a work of art or not. And they had like, okay, this is her contact, or I had to go on Google to find it, I don't remember, but I was so compelled to message her and show like, okay, there is something new in the world. This is new. This is really amazing artwork. And I said, thank you. I came to Canada to try to be an artist, and this is new. This is amazing. And then she told me, oh, okay, like we had like 80,000 people coming in, and then just a handful see. And then she would offer the Eyes Open tour. And the idea of the Eyes Open tour is that she would tell exactly all the art references, all the elements. And then she even eventually, when I was about to finish my master's degree in Canada, she was a friend of my main research supervisor. And I went to the book launch of her book that talked about this project. It's called He Named Her Amber. And I highly recommend. I already gave you the end of the story, but that's the narrative. Like, and I even told her, remember, like, I hope I never know when your next artwork is. I know she's now doing some artworks in Canada, and I know she has some stuff in Europe. Very inspirational, and I cannot recommend enough checking out her work. She's very cool, very subtle, and this was something new. And that's the next thing that it was like what launched my pursuit of an artistic career in photography specifically. That should go on the tools, on the Wanderings tools too. So the creativelive.com, so the Creative Live platform, where you had classes that are free or paid, like you can watch for free when it's like happening live. It was created by photographer Chase Jarvis. And there I saw, when I was doing my master's, and I'll do a whole episode about the graduate arts, like graduate school in the arts, referencing my master's. And there was a photographer called Brooke Shaden. And she does these self-portraits and these very surreal scenes using Photoshop. And that really unlocked, my style is not like that, but the pursuit of art came from her story, which is why I also feel like taking some time to tell you the things that inspire me, because you never know what will spark someone else and start their own journey or to get them unstuck. Hopefully, my long walk would serve as your shortcut. That's the essence of this podcast. And Brooke Shaden, what she did, and I'm doing that now, actually, now that I think about it. She said, oh, I will. She was working as a secretary, it was like this regular jobs. She said, no, I want to try to be a photographer. I will really try. And in my case, it's really try to combine all these works that I like to do and try to make it. And she says, I'll give myself a year. That's exactly what I did. So that idea echoed from 2012 to 2013. I was doing like commercial photography work, I was doing music work, I was doing this travel, like it's not like I'm not doing stuff. It's just that some things that are very close to the heart, they were still dormant. And the vehicle, the ship that I found that I really you probably can hear in my voice, very passionate about, is using this podcast as the tool to share with you these ideas. Now, let me tell you lastly, the one place, and then I'll show you a couple photos. And the one place that changed my life, really, and I know it's like, I went to the pyramids and it changed my life. Yeah, it was the case. And of course, there are other places that changed my life too, but this is a recent one. And it's like very easy for us to go back and see, when the good old days, when it was this or that. And I was super, not depressed, but like I was super, let's say, about like my life not that long ago. And at some point when I went to the pyramids, I was like, my 8-year-old self would be very happy that his, back then 44, was able to come and see the pyramids on his own terms. I don't have to go on a tour and see for 1 or 2 days. I could take my time. I went to the pyramids 10 times since I've been in Cairo. Like people usually that live here, they actually don't even care about the pyramids. It's sort of like a tourist trap for them. But to me, it meant so much more. And then I'd like, as usual, to share with you a text that I wrote right after my first visit to the pyramids, which is called Better Times. When my wife and I moved from Canada to Ukraine in 2019, the idea was to be based in Kyiv for a few years to work and travel around Europe, the Near East, India, and eventually settle back in Toronto. Since then, the gods and powers that be decided to play SimCity with the planet, and through a pandemic that glued us to Ukraine, and then a war that pushed us off to the shores of Brazil. Plans and intentions have been changing continuously throughout this time. Seeing the pyramids of Giza has always been on any version of these plans, and they have always been delayed for a better time. This spring, Yana Komarnitska and I decided to get back on the road and step into fulfilling postponed dreams with all the flaws and imperfections of timing. As I finally stood there under the blazing sun, I imagined the long-gone white casing stones that, at better times, covered the pyramid walls. I thought of the people who were mad enough to make such marvelous things. Were they creating oversized tombs for their politicians, as today's archaeologists say? Or were they making something way more profound, as today's mystics hope? Whatever their vision was, at some point in the deep past, they thought it better not to wait, better to go and build dreams, stone by stone, powered by what I can only fathom were hopes for better times to come. And I think they knew what I realized during this particular trip. Better times are not to be waited for. Better times are made. So this is what I wrote during my first visit to the pyramids. I literally cried when I touched the stones. It was a lifelong dream. And I think it's worth trying to do those things. Like I gave up a lot of things to be able to have this art traveling lifestyle that not always support us properly. But I wanted to finish off, and I thank you so much for staying here with me. Let me show you, as I reflect on all these things, artworks from other people that have inspired me, one artwork that really unlocked my purpose, my skills, my interest. I actually have a little print that I carry around with me. I used to have this on my walls. It's a scene from the Orientalist series. It's called An Empire of Secret Wishes. It was shot in Bulgaria, in Sofia, in a beautiful restaurant called Zenobia, with Boriana Dimitrova's troupe, a bunch of musicians, a bunch of dancers, that really encapsulates a lot of the works that I was trying to do and try to convey, this idea of intrigue, this idea of the lighting, the intricate sets, the storytelling embedded in the characters. I can trace back all these elements to the artworks that inspired me and that I shared in this episode. Also, by creating this image, I was able to transform that inspiration into action. The action of a photographer who likes to create imagined worlds and invite the audience to decode and create their own stories. with the help of all these talented artists and the owners of the location, what I learned by making this scene is that inspiration is a breath in, but it must be followed by a breath out, which is putting the work, however it comes, out in the world. And I hope by me sharing some of the work that I've done, this will be inspirational for you. And speaking of that, I wanted to mention that a few ways to support my work is something that I came up with a couple of, throughout the process of creating these new episodes. I mentioned this in previous episodes too, but I'm sort of like having this idea of having a postcard from the roads, or at least these postcards from imagined lands, from imagined landscapes, which is how I see a lot of my photography. And I would love to have that as something that I can provide for you somehow later. I think that would be a cool way for you to, for me to get in touch with you. And if you're inspired by my work, it's a way to support me, and to not only to support me, but to have these as little portals that we have in our rooms or hidden in like books or something that we find from time to time, and we find inspiration on the arts of other people that are trying to share their passion and their interests. So postcards from the road, or these postcards from imagined lands, are this way that you can buy postcards from some of my photos that will come out throughout this year. You can go to pedrobonato.com/store, take a look there, see if there is anything that interests you. Over time, I will have a catalog of my works as like fine art limited edition prints. That's coming later. But for now, for let's say 99% of us, I would love if this work spoke to you. If you would like to have a little reminder, if you'd like to send it to someone, oh, I thought of you, this character, this imagination of this character or this situation, this reminded me of you. Sending those to me, it's sort of like this messages in a bottle. This sort of like how I'm seeing this. And I am, usually artists are not cool with selling their art. I actually want supporters. I actually want sponsors for the podcast. And if you like my art, I will try to make it as easy and affordable as possible. You can give that as a thank you. Another option is if you like my music, which you will see in that page too, you can go to iTunes, or you can go to Spotify and listen to it there, or you can buy as a digital download on my website. As you will see, there are 2 songs. I'm working on 3 other ones, subject for another time. But I'm trying to do this combination of photography, visual arts installation, and music that I create. And the way that I'm doing this is I see the image and then I create music on top of it. That will be featured in another episode as soon as I'm finally done with that particular photo. But anyway, about the postcards, this is a way for you to support my work. There will be some merch that is coming up that I imagine related to Wanderings. Finally, I wanted to finish off with a cool quote. I already did one, but I think we deserve another one. It's a quote by a Spanish poet called Antonio Machado, and he said that, I'll say in Spanish and then I'll say my translation in English, that is, caminante no hay camino, se hace camino al andar. The way that I translated it, because caminante means like walker or traveler, but it can be also wanderer. And so since the Wanderings podcast, I translated this quote as, wanderer, there is no path. The path is made by walking. And I think that's sort of like going through this exercise of me going through all these artworks that inspired me in all these different areas. We saw video games, we saw installation art, we saw all sorts of things across many countries around the world. And I haven't even touched Egypt really, and Cambodia, which comes later. But they were very important. But like seeing Angkor Wat, doing my photos there, that was absolutely fascinating. That deserves its own episode. But I wanted to take this moment and really talk about this idea of wandering. Sometimes we wander through our ideas, sometimes we wander through life in the physical space, and sometimes our history is this wandering of our soul. It's sort of like how I see it. And with that, my name is Pedro Bonato. You can find me on social media and on my website, anywhere. If you want to send me a question, in audio, video or format, or just in text of something that interests you, you can send it to me on my website, pedrobonato.com/ask. And my final note is follow your curiosity. Go make beautiful things, make Dante Alighieri happy, and share them with the world. And I'll see you next time.